March 2023, my cat Katniss got extremely sick. This resulted in like a slew of vet visits where we got a lot of tests and treatments and medicine and ultimately stress. This all eventually resulted in a tentative diagnosis of IBD, or Irritable Bowel Disease. At the time, I had absolutely no idea what IBD was, and frankly, tentative wasn't super reassuring either. And so I am making this video from a cat owner's perspective to share not only what we've been through, but what we've learned. And my hope is that if your cat is going through similar symptoms or a similar diagnostic process, that this video will be helpful and reassuring. Katniss is my 5-year-old Siamese ragdoll mix who was born to a feral colony in Denver and who I took in at about 6 weeks old at a time in my life when I really needed rescuing, and we kind of helped each other out. She is now my baby. There's literally nothing I would not do for this cat. She's the sweetest thing. So throughout Katniss's life, I have been really diligent about keeping up with all things medical. We go for regular vet exams, she's up to date on vaccinations, I try to feed her a healthy, balanced diet, and just generally keep my eyes peeled for signs or symptoms of anything. And so I was completely caught off guard in February of 2023 when I woke up one morning and what I found was literally like 8 piles of vomit all throughout the house. It was a liquidy like brown color and it really just seemed to come out of nowhere. So she also did have a very liquidy diarrhea. I want to pause for a minute to say that while it felt like it came out of the blue at the time, in hindsight I think there are a couple of signs that I had missed. First, Katniss's appetite had changed. She had not finished meals for like the past couple of months, and that was unusual for her. However, because she wasn't acting like she was feeling sick, I think it didn't even occur to me that that was problematic. Secondly, her weight had dropped a bit. At her annual physical, she weighed in at 8.9 pounds, where she was typically more like 9.5. The vet actually made a comment that she's a small bone cat and that might even be a better weight for her, so it completely didn't even occur to me that that could be a problem. I guess I assumed that if it was, the vet would tell me. It is only in hindsight and through a bunch of research that I realized that weight loss and appetite changes are early or can be early indications of an issue. So if you do see those signs in your cat, it is just something to be aware of. I didn't have any clue at the time what had caused it. My immediate thought was Katniss does have an Instagram presence and she has been receiving some gifts from some of her kitty friends, and those gifts frequently included like different treats and snacks, and I thought perhaps I had fed her something that she had a reaction to, like got made her sick or food poisoning or something like that. I actually had a friend ask me, are you going to take her to the vet? And my first reaction was, no, I'm not going to take her to the vet. She probably just had an upset stomach. She'll be okay. But as the day progressed, she really clearly didn't feel well. And the bigger concern was she was not eating or drinking. And I may not be a cat expert, and I'm certainly not a veterinarian, but I do know that cats cannot go for long periods of time without eating, without it being flat out dangerous. I was also kind of worried about dehydration. So I thought, okay, I'll make an appointment. Ultimately, we ended up going to what would turn out to be 8 different vet appointments over the span of months in order to arrive at our diagnosis. And so when we went initially, it was really much more an exam, telling the vet what had happened, sharing my theory that perhaps it had been food poisoning, and she was pretty dismissive, didn't think that sounded right. And so she wanted to do some basic, like a comprehensive blood panel, and she gave Katniss some fluids to help with dehydration. She gave Katniss an anti-nausea injection. I believe she gave a B12 injection, and she prescribed to us an antibiotic called metronidazole. And basically the idea of these things was to treat the symptoms to get Katniss back to a point where she felt well enough to eat. And the blood test was going to tell us if there was anything immediately obvious going on. So that blood panel actually came back normal. Like, it didn't show anything wrong with liver or kidneys or anything that immediately stood out to the vet as that could be a sign. And so on one hand, that was a relief, and on the other hand, it was kind of like, okay. And so she had said an x-ray would be another good step to just make sure there's no obstruction or to see if there's any obvious large masses. She did tell me that an x-ray won't show everything, but it was a good way to eliminate the fact that maybe she had swallowed a toy or something. So we did that as well. Ultimately, these treatments for her symptoms made Katniss feel better enough where I brought her home, and for a few days things improved. But what ended up happening is she would slip back into this like really not feeling well, and you know your cat. You know when they're laying around and they're lethargic and they're just different than they normally are. So I would bring her back and we would go through this process again, literally, and the vet would do an exam and feel her abdomen, and Katniss never showed any signs of pain. She would give her fluids, she would give her more B12, she would continue the prescriptions. She assigned some prescription food, and I started trying to feed Katniss this, and it was basically, long story short, it was a trial and error process. I think what I learned is the vet, at least that we went to, really wanted to start out conservatively and try to see if the answer was simple, and then when that wasn't resolving the problem, they would move to the next step. Because this pattern continued with the cycle of feeling better and then slipping back into the not feeling so great, we began talking about doing an ultrasound. And this was actually a big deal for me just because at this particular vet, they use anesthesia to knock cats out. It's just their policy to do an ultrasound. And I was really opposed to doing anesthesia because Katniss in the past has had a bad reaction to it that was scary. And so she had told me that there were other vets that do non-anesthesia ultrasounds, but they weren't one of them. So we got referred to a specialist, and this was an internal medicine specialist. And so we had to make an appointment there, go in for a consultation to get the ultrasound scheduled. They don't use anesthesia as a general rule unless absolutely necessary. In fact, they try to use nothing, which I really like. Apparently, Katniss ended up getting a light sedative because she was not super thrilled about them shaving her belly. But generally speaking, it was just a much better way to go. So one thing that I did learn is that you do not have to use anesthesia for an ultrasound. And in fact, apparently it's not super common. But if you find that your vet does, just know that you can look around for other places that don't. And so this is where we really started to get down to what was going on. The ultrasound results came back, and as a cat owner, the terminology being thrown at me and just what was said over the phone was really hard to digest and understand, like the vet, I'm sure, understood it. And it's nothing they did wrong, it's just, it's not my world. And so they would throw out terminology and it would just not stick. So this is just my layperson's way of describing it. But she called me and she basically said that it was mostly a good news scenario about the ultrasound. They did not find any large masses. And so that apparently ruled out like an aggressive type of lymphoma or intestinal cancer that can be the cause of this. And she also told me that she saw some thickening of the lining of Katniss's intestine. And that is an indication that Katniss either has IBD, which is essentially like a food allergy, I would almost say, like the gut reacting to something that it cannot digest well, or it can also be this exact same thickening can be a sign of small-celled lymphoma. So with cancer, there's the large-celled, which is really aggressive and apparently easy to see on an ultrasound because it's like a big tumor, and then there's the small-celled, which looks just like IBD, and it's impossible to tell if it is IBD or small-cell lymphoma unless you go in and do a surgical biopsy of the colon and just examine the tissue. So I remember at the time, as much as I could absorb, I asked the vet 2 questions. I asked her, so what does the ultrasound result rule out? And I remember she told me it rules out the large-celled aggressive cancer, which is good. It rules out obstruction. And basically by this point, I think we had already ruled out things like kidney or liver or other diseases like that. And then the question was, with the thickening of the intestinal wall, is it IBD or is it small-cell lymphoma? And she did say that regardless of what the diagnosis is, they're basically treated the same way, and that small-cell lymphoma, the cancer, while a scary word, it's generally non-aggressive and it's treated the same way, and cats can live many, many years with it. So she said that the next step, if I really wanted to know the answer to that, would be a surgical biopsy. But this is an invasive, definitely anesthesia needed procedure that is extremely costly. And she basically said, it's probably not necessary at this stage just because no matter what the result is, we're going to treat it the same. So she thought that it made sense to just assume that it's IBD and start with the treatment for IBD and start easy and see if that helped Katniss. And then if it didn't, we could take the next step and the next step and the next step. So another question I asked her that day was on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being like the very best case scenario and 10 being the absolute worst case scenario, where would you rank the results of this ultrasound? And she was really frank. She said about a 4 to 5. This is not the end of the world, but it is tricky and requires a lot of management to treat. So again, at the time, I didn't absorb everything she was telling me and understand very much about IBD. I've done since a ton of reading and YouTube video watching and just research, and I know a lot more now. It is essentially an inflammation of the linings of the intestine, and it can be caused by many different things. There's like different diseases that are all kind of classified under the same umbrella, and they can be treated by modifying diet about half the time. And then the other half the time, food modification doesn't really solve the problem, and then there's medicine the cat can be on for the rest of its life. One of the most helpful videos that I watched about IBD, I would actually refer other people to watch. It is created by a Vancouver vet, and in fact his channel is Helpful Vancouver Vet, and I'm going to link the video below in my description. It's about 25 minutes long, and it really did a great job of breaking down what is IBD, what are the difference between IBD and small cell lymphoma and large cell lymphoma, etc. In terms of where Katniss and I were, we don't know for certain that it's IBD, but the vet wants to assume that it is and start treating it mildly. So she recommends that we do like a complete food trial, like a food exclusion trial. And essentially this means cold turkey stop feeding Katniss absolutely everything she's used to eating and assign a new food, which is like a novel or a new protein her body has never experienced, and see if this new protein fixes her symptoms. So the idea being that if it does fix the symptoms, she has essentially some kind of food allergy and it can be managed like that. If it does not resolve her symptoms, that's likely an indication she may need to do the medicine route, like steroids, etc. And so again, similar to my initial vet, the approach was, let's try the conservative management first and hope that we get the result, and if not, we can move to the next step and the next step. Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't like the idea of a complete food exclusion trial from the moment she told me. And it's just simply because Katniss is such a picky eater, and it is such a fine balance between wanting to do what the vet tells me is a good idea, and knowing that if Katniss stops eating, that's gonna just cause a whole other group of issues. And so I was hesitant from the beginning, but absolutely willing to try it. She gave a prescription for Royal Canin. It was like a PR protein diet. I believe it was kangaroo meat. I'm not 100% sure, but it was like a really random animal that they're not used to eating. And I bought some, and I brought it home, and literally, Katniss may have taken a bite or two, sniffed it, walked away. You can argue that it was the first time, I could try again, and I did. I definitely did. This food was not cheap. It was like $3 or $4 a can, and she was literally sniffing it, walking away, ignoring it, and it would go bad. And so I only did this a handful of times before I realized there has to be a balance between doing this and getting something into her. And so, long story short, I modified what I thought I could get away with at a very, very, very slow pace, and it is definitely not what the vet was hoping would be ideal, but it's what I could do. And I think that's the other thing that's been frustrating about this, is it is a fine balance. And in an ideal world, they'll tell you what they want you to do, but the reality is your cat will also tell you what it's willing to eat, and it's like... So ultimately, really just to kind of sum it up, what we ended up doing and where we are at today. So what I've been able to do versus, the ideal that the vet recommended is I have completely transitioned her hard food. So that was a process where I had to start out by putting just a little bit of the prescription hard food into her normal hard food. And gradually that proportion changed until it was like 50-50, 70-30, 90-10. And then now today she is literally only on prescription hard food. So that has been our biggest victory. Also, I did, because I couldn't get her to transition to the prescription soft food, I just decided I'm not going to fight that battle. I'm going to stick with her normal soft food, which was at the time Sheba. But I did limit flavors, and I don't even know if that mattered, but like she at the time had been eating any and all flavors they offered, and I decided I'm just gonna limit it to like 2 or 3 that I think she likes best, and that way if there are some varieties or other things in some of them, maybe that will help. I have no clue if that worked at all. And then she loves these tube treats, like she's obsessed with them, and I still give her the tube treats in one single brand, but I have eliminated all other treats and just samples of anything. But it was a balance I felt was sustainable, and it's what I could get her to do. One of the reasons that I didn't want to eliminate the tube treats, not just that she likes them, is because that's how I get medicine into her. And it's been actually really helpful to stick the pills when needed into the tube treat, because she just eats it so quickly that it just goes right in. It's a hassle-free, pain-free way to do it, and so again, that was just part of this balancing act. So Katniss today, I mean, it's October 2023 as I film this video, so we have been like 8 months of this. And today she's doing a lot better. So we had agreed after the ultrasound that 6 months after the fact I would go back for a follow-up and the vet would assess where she's at. So we went back for our follow-up just a few weeks ago, and I found out that since that time she has gained 2 pounds. In fact, the vet told me she is slightly overweight now, like definitely doesn't need to gain any more weight. And she, again, passed the exam. We redid blood work and everything looked great. The vet at this time also suggested I do a specific blood panel, and it's a test to see if her colon is absorbing nutrients. So if those numbers had been off, that would be an indication that what we're doing really isn't as helpful as I think it's been. But those numbers were actually right all in range. So again, all of the symptoms that Katniss had back in February, they were like a one-time bout of that. And since then, she's done pretty well. So, I mean, some things that just popped to my mind, if I'm being very honest, is could the inflammation that they saw on the ultrasound had been a temporary reaction from like a bug, or possibly even misread on the ultrasound? Like, I have no idea. But it does make me wonder, or is Katniss just really lucky in that it's a very mild case and just some slight modifications have helped? So, as I already stated, guys, I am not a vet, and one thing I've definitely learned about IBD is that all cases are different. So, what works for Katniss may or may not be helpful for somebody else, and there's so much variation in even this diagnosis. And frankly, like I said at the beginning, we don't even know for sure this is IBD. Maybe it really is small cell lymphoma. And ultimately, I don't know if we're going to end up doing that biopsy, but one thing I have learned through my research is that you can do like a minimally invasive one. And apparently not too many vets have access to this, but I'm going to try to find that if we decide to go that route. But I wanted to share just some real brief tips about things that have helped us. If you're currently going through this situation, I hope that maybe some of them will be useful to you. So the first is literally a semi-dietary modification is better than none at all. You've got to be realistic about what your cat will do. I think getting rid of the it has to be all or none mentality was helpful. I think a true fluid exclusion trial does need to be all or none, but if you just can't get your cat to go down that path, again, it's a fine balance between getting your cat to eat and figuring out these other things. So I'm just saying that even doing a little bit can be helpful. So kind of that perfectionist mentality that it has to be exactly how the vet says, it was helpful for me to lose that because I realized we were still taking steps. Number two, something that we have done that I am a huge advocate of is I have been giving Katniss a daily probiotic since like literally back in the spring. It's basically a powder. It comes in a capsule form and you break it open and it's a powder, and I sprinkle it into the tube treat and I feed her the tube treat and she devours it. Apparently has like a vanilla-ish flavor. But it's basically just like different types of healthy gut bacteria that go into her system and help restore that balance that may be out of whack. I don't know what the scientific research says about doing this. I know that my vet didn't appear to be super confident that it would fix the issue, but I have to tell you, I haven't done a lot of other modifications except this has been a consistent, and Katniss is doing great. So I will advocate for this all day long. For what it's worth, this is the one that works really well for us. I know that it can't hurt a cat, so even if it doesn't help tremendously, it's not going to hurt your cat. I would honestly highly recommend trying a probiotic for all the reasons stated. Another tip that I'm extremely, I'm gonna advocate for this just from my heart, is to get a water fountain if you do not already have one. Prior to all this going on, Katniss actually didn't have a water fountain. I had a misconception in my mind about how effective it would be. I got one after she got sick just because hydration was such a concern. I was willing to try and do anything to get her hydrated, and I figured a water fountain would be a concrete way to measure how much she was drinking. I cannot tell you, number one, how much she absolutely loves it, and number two, how helpful it's been. I personally am a fan of UAH Pet's wireless water fountain. I got it back in the spring, and I just ordered literally like another year's worth of filters because you can change the filters regularly for cleanliness. I am so glad that I have this product. So the cool thing about it is it's wireless, so you can literally put it anywhere. And this is helpful, especially because when Katniss wasn't feeling well, I could bring it to her. But even when she is feeling well, I can still bring it to her. And I don't have to worry about cords, which since she's kind of a chewer, that is helpful. So instead of cords, you literally it's like a wireless battery charger, and the battery has lasted us months without a recharge. So it's super, super, super efficient. Katniss loves to sit and like literally stare at this fountain too, so she'll drink from it, she'll kind of paw the water, which I think is super cute, and she will watch it. So she clearly loves it. And as an owner, I find it really helpful that there's two filters. So there's one that you can pop in and out, and then there's this little spongy type filter. But they both ensure that the drinking water is as clean as can be. It is super easy to disassemble and reassemble and clean. And again, I'm a huge water fountain advocate after this experience. And this particular fountain really fits well for us. If you would like to try it, I have a code to save 20% off down in the description below. I sincerely think that it's made a huge difference, and I will continue to use it and advocate for it. Along those lines, since we're talking about wireless water fountains, I actually did make, the next tip would be that I switched where Katniss was allowed to go at night, and I literally moved all her stuff into my master bedroom, and I lock her in with me at night now. I never used to do that. She had free reign of the house. I do this only from a monitoring perspective. It's easier to monitor her litter box usage, her drinking, her eating, if she is constantly within my line of sight and vision. I honestly didn't intend for it to go on this long. It was just something I was doing when she was really sick, and it's continued, and I'm gonna continue to do it. It may not be for you. It works for me. Added bonus is she'll cuddle up next to me and purr and sleep next to me, so who doesn't love that? Next tip is there are two things I would always keep on hand, really honestly no matter what stage of this you're at or exactly your cat's symptoms, and I do keep them on hand. One is an appetite stimulant. I believe it's called Mirataz, and I have the one where you can rub it on the inner part of a cat's ear. So it's super, super, super easy to administer. And I have that just because you just don't know when these things might flare up again. And certainly if it happens over a weekend, rather than rushing to an emergency vet, I now know that I can treat the symptoms, kind of get through that period of time, and then get back into our normal vet. So I keep an appetite stimulant on hand, and then I keep an anti-nausea tablet on hand called Serenia. Both are available via prescription through a vet. So those are two things that I'd keep in your kitty medicine cabinet if dealing with this issue. Second to last tip, I think I've already kind of hinted at it, telling you all the research and reading and video watching I've done, but literally research, video watch, and just talk to other pet owners. I have found it so helpful to describe Katniss's experiences on Instagram, and I've learned that many of her kitty friends actually deal with a similar thing. It is not uncommon in cats. It is also not a death sentence or like a horrific thing. It is completely manageable, but there's a lot of frustrations, and when you share frustrations and ideas with other pet owners, number one, it expands your knowledge base, and you might learn about something that you can try that you didn't think of. And number two, it helps bond and forge relationships. So not only have I learned more, but Katniss has more friends now. And it's I can't say enough for the great Cats of Instagram community, but wherever it is you're connected with other pet owners, don't be afraid to discuss your experiences, ask for advice, and just seek help. And finally, guys, just the last tip is, I've already said it, but this is a trial and error thing, and I think accepting that is so important. I used to have this idea that you take your cat or your animal, you get sick, take it to the vet, a diagnosis is given, a medicine is given, you come home, it's done. I have learned that IBD is much more the marathon as opposed to the proverbial sprint, and there is a lot of ups and downs, almost like a roller coaster marathon. So sometimes you think you got it all figured out and then it flares up again. Sometimes something stops working and you have to change it. And frankly, I think that accepting that mentality makes it less stressful. So for what it's worth, if you can digest that it's a trial and error, that it's going to be a lot to juggle and modify and learn about and change, I think honestly it will go over much better. So in terms of IBD, that's basically where Katniss is now. She's doing well, she is stable. She is not out of the woods. There are definitely times, and her eating has been very kind of erratic, and I've gotten better about not panicking about this. In fact, again, I think it was the Helpful Vancouver Vet had a video about how cats eat and how they have a high nutritional intelligence and how you shouldn't panic every single time they're not finishing all their food. Yes, you look for patterns, and yes, it is dangerous for a cat to not eat for a prolonged period, but 1 or 2 meals where their appetite fluctuates may just be Katniss telling me, yo mom, I've gained a couple of pounds, I'm feeling better, I don't need to eat this much. Generally speaking, she's doing well, and I'm getting better at kind of riding this roller coaster and just watching and not panicking, which is not an easy thing for somebody like me to do. I do want to say one final point about the cost of all this. So we have been in and out of the vet, as I mentioned, lots of tests, lots of trial and error. Collectively, it's been 8 vet visits since February and a lot of different tests. And every time you go to the vet, they redo the exam and blah, blah, blah. It's added up to about $5,000. It's not an exact figure, but it's right around there. And that doesn't really include the prescription food. That stuff is expensive, but you have to buy food for your pets anyway, so that's why I don't include it. Katniss is not insured. I didn't have pet insurance. I think the experience has opened my eyes to how important pet insurance could be. It's too late for us now because anything that's associated with this would not be covered since it's pre-existing. But if I could do it over again, probably would have taken a different approach. I made a video if you want to check it out about pet insurance, but I think the biggest thing is, even though I'm in a situation where I could handle the bills, I do think that your mentality changes. If you were insured, it would be much more of a quick, yes, just do it, get the answers, no hesitation. When you're not insured, even if you can afford the bills, there's still like a, how much is that gonna cost? This is adding up. You start just thinking differently. So I think almost a peace of mind for insurance would make sense. Vet expenses are way higher than I realized they had become. So, I mean, the number that we're at is high, but I could easily see how this could go much higher, particularly if you start adding like surgical biopsies. Or, I mean, for God forbid, something else happens unrelated. So it's just like the last point of this video is if you don't have pet insurance, it may be something you want to consider. If you do have it, I'd love to hear your experiences with it because I am making some assumptions that these things would be covered and it would not be a hassle. It's better to, I guess, have it and not need it than need it and not have it. But, you know, can't fix that now. So moving forward, I may take a different approach. Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this is just helpful from like a down-to-earth pet parent perspective. The vets use a ton of terminology. It is not easy to digest at first, but this is, generally speaking, a very manageable, treatable, and livable condition. There is a lot of trial and error that does bring with it stress. Not every outcome is the same. Some are more severe than others, but don't be afraid to advocate for your pet. Try what you think works and makes sense, and make adjustments along the way. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys have any questions, please drop them below. Katniss and I are so grateful that you took the time to listen to her story, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.